The iron wheels of the train screeched against the rails as it pulled away from Boston's South Station, carrying Eliza Whitlow toward a future she had never chosen. She pressed her gloved hand against the cold window, watching the familiar brick buildings and church spires fade into the morning mist. Everything she had ever known was disappearing behind her, replaced by the promise of vast plains and mountain peaks she had only seen in Harper's weekly illustrations. Her fingers found the letter in her reticule, worn soft from constant handling during the past 3 months. Roland Sharp's penmanship was bold and confident. His words painted pictures of a prosperous cattle ranch nestled in Colorado's foothills, of wildflowers blooming in alpine meadows, of a life where she would want for nothing. Her parents had been impressed by his eloquence and, more importantly, by the bank statements he'd included as proof of his substantial holdings. "A girl of 24 cannot afford to be particular," her mother had said, not unkindly, but with the firm practicality that governed all her decisions. "Your father's business troubles have limited your options considerably." Eliza had wanted to protest that she would rather work as a governess or seamstress than marry a stranger. But the steel in her mother's eyes had silenced her. The marriage contract had been signed, the modest dowry transferred, and her fate sealed with wax and proper witnesses. The train car swayed gently as it picked up speed, and Eliza opened her travel case to check its contents once more. Her wedding dress lay folded in tissue paper, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk that had belonged to her grandmother. Beneath it, her journal, a Bible, a daguerreotype of her parents, and the sketch Roland had sent of himself. She studied the image again, trying to find warmth in the stern features, some hint of kindness in the set of his jaw. Days blended into one another as the train carried her westward. Through her window, she watched the landscape transform from the gentle hills of Pennsylvania to the endless prairies of Kansas. Other passengers came and went, families heading to California, cowboys returning from cattle drives, merchants with cases full of goods for frontier towns. Some tried to make conversation, but Eliza kept to herself, reading her worn copy of Jane Eyre and writing in her journal. "The vastness of this country is both thrilling and terrifying," she wrote one evening as the sun set over the plains in a blaze of orange and purple. "I feel as though I'm being swallowed by it, becoming smaller with each mile that passes. Perhaps that is what Mr. Sharp desires, a wife made humble by the journey, grateful for any shelter at its end." When the train finally wheezed to a stop at the depot in Cedar Ridge, Colorado, Eliza's legs trembled as she descended to the platform. The October air bit at her cheeks, carrying the scent of snow from the mountains that loomed like sleeping giants against the sky. She stood among her trunks, searching the crowd for a face that matched the sketch. "Miss Whitlow." The voice came from behind her, flat and cold as creek stones. She turned to find a man who bore only a passing resemblance to the portrait. Where the sketch showed a gentleman of perhaps 35 with kind eyes, this man appeared a decade older, his face weathered to leather by sun and wind. His pale eyes moved over her with the calculating gaze of a man appraising livestock at auction. "Mr. Sharp," her voice came out smaller than intended. "Get your things. We've got 2 hours of daylight left." He made no move to help as she struggled with her trunks, merely watching with those unsettling eyes. A ranch hand finally took pity and loaded her belongings into the wagon. The ride to the ranch passed in uncomfortable silence. Eliza tried twice to make conversation, commenting on the beauty of the mountains and asking about the ranch, but Roland answered in grunts and monosyllables. His hands on the reins were scarred and brutal-looking, nothing like the cultured hands that had penned those eloquent letters. The Sharp ranch sprawled across a valley like a small town unto itself. The main house, bunkhouses, stables, corrals, and outbuildings all proclaiming prosperity. But there was something cold about it all, something that made Eliza's skin prickle with unease. No flowers softened the harsh lines of the buildings. No woman's touch evident anywhere. "Your room," Roland said, leading her up narrow stairs to a small chamber under the eaves. It was clean but Spartan, a narrow bed, washstand, and single chair. Bars covered the window. "For protection against Indians," he said, noting her gaze. though his smile suggested otherwise. That evening, she dined alone while Roland met with his foreman. The housekeeper, a severe woman named Mrs. Crane, served tough beef and beans without a word. Later, Eliza could hear Roland's voice through the floor, loud with drink, punctuated by coarse laughter from his men. The days that followed did nothing to ease her fears. Roland showed no interest in courtship or gentle conversation. He spoke to her only to issue orders about household matters or to criticize. Her cooking was too fancy, her Eastern ways too soft, her dowry smaller than expected. The wedding was set for Saturday, 3 days hence, and preparations proceeded with grim efficiency. On Friday evening, unable to sleep, Eliza crept downstairs for water and overheard Roland in his study with his foreman, Jake Morrison. "Once the preacher says the words, 'She's mine legal and proper,'" Roland was saying. "Then we'll see about breaking that Eastern pride. A firm hand is all these delicate types need. Had a filly once. Same skittish temperament. Took a week of proper handling, but she learned her place." Jake's laugh was ugly. "What about the dowry? Her old man might cause trouble if she complains." "Won't be any complaining. Amazing how quick they quiet down when they're 20 miles from the nearest neighbor. Besides, her parents washed their hands of her the moment they signed those papers. Probably relieved to have her off their hands." Eliza's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. She backed away from the door, her mind racing. The letters, they must have been written by someone else, or copied from some guide. This man was no gentleman rancher, but a brute who saw her as property to be broken. She climbed the stairs on trembling legs, her decision crystallizing with each step. In her room, she changed into her sturdiest dress and boots, packed what she could carry in a small satchel, her journal, the daguerreotype, what little money she had, and her mother's garnet brooch. The wedding dress she left on the bed like a ghost of the life she was abandoning. The house had fallen silent. Through her window, she could see snow beginning to fall, the first storm of the season arriving early. It was madness to flee into such weather, but the alternative was a lifetime of captivity. She wrapped her cloak tight and crept down the stairs, avoiding the squeaking boards she'd memorized. The kitchen door opened silently. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving snow in wild spirals across the yard. She hesitated on the threshold. Behind her lay a kind of safety, cruel but predictable. Ahead, the mountains rose into the storm, offering nothing but uncertainty and probable death. Roland's words echoed in her mind. A firm hand is all these delicate types need. Eliza stepped into the storm. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her eyes water. She stumbled across the yard, keeping to the shadows, then broke into a run when she reached the tree line. Behind her, the ranch windows glowed like yellow eyes in the darkness, but no alarm had been raised. Not yet. She had no plan beyond escape, no destination but away. The forest closed around her, ancient pines groaning under the weight of wind and snow. Within minutes, she was lost, her tracks filling as quickly as she made them. Her beautiful wedding cloak, meant for a church aisle, caught on branches and thorns until it hung in tatters. The storm intensified, turning the world into a howling white void. Eliza stumbled on, driven by fear and desperate hope, even as her limbs grew numb and her strength faded. Somewhere in the darkness, wolves howled, and she wondered if their end would be kinder than the fate she'd fled. When she finally fell, it was at the edge of a ravine she never saw coming. The ground simply vanished beneath her feet, sending her tumbling down the rocky slope in a cascade of snow and stones. She came to rest against a fallen log, her ankle twisted, her hands torn and bleeding. The storm raged on, burying her in its embrace. As consciousness faded, Eliza's last thought was a prayer, not for rescue, but for a death free of chains. She never heard the approaching footsteps, never saw the figure that emerged from the storm like a piece of the mountain itself come to life. Strong arms lifted her from her icy grave, and a voice rough as bark but unexpectedly gentle murmured words she couldn't understand. The last thing she remembered was being carried through the howling darkness, held against a chest that radiated heat like a forge. while somewhere far above, the wind screamed through the peaks like all the furies of heaven and earth combined. Warmth. That was the first sensation that penetrated the fog of Eliza's consciousness. Not the gentle warmth of a drawing-room fire, but something deeper, more primal. It wrapped around her like a living thing, seeping into bones she'd thought frozen forever. She tried to open her eyes but found them too heavy, as if weighted with stones. Voices drifted through the haze, or rather, one voice, low and rough, speaking words that might have been prayer or curse. The language of it was English, but clipped and sparse, as if words were coins too precious to spend freely. "Foolish woman, storm like that'll kill a man in an hour, let alone—" The voice trailed off into muttering. She felt hands, careful despite their size, checking her limbs, wrapping something warm and soft around her feet. Each touch was impersonal, efficient, like someone tending to an injured animal. When she finally managed to open her eyes, the world swam into focus slowly. Above her, rough wooden beams supported a low ceiling. Firelight danced across the walls, revealing a space that was part cabin, part cave. The back wall was living rock, incorporated into the structure as if the builder had simply decided to partner with the mountain rather than fight it. She turned her head, a motion that sent lightning through her skull, and saw him. He sat in a chair by the fire, cleaning a rifle with methodical precision. The first thing she noticed was his size, not just tall but broad, built like one of the old oak trees that lined Boston Common. His hair was dark, shot through with premature silver, and hung past his collar in the fashion of mountain men. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but couldn't hide the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir of violence that made her stomach clench. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. His eyes were gray as winter sky, holding neither warmth nor hostility, just a watchful stillness that reminded her of a wolf deciding whether something was threat or prey. "You're awake?" It wasn't a question. He set the rifle aside and moved to the stove, his movements surprisingly quiet for such a large man. "Need to get water in you?" She tried to speak but only managed to croak. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed hot sand. He brought a tin cup to her lips, supporting her head with one hand. The water was warm, flavored with pine needles and something medicinal. "Slow," he commanded when she tried to gulp. "Too much too fast and you'll sick it up." When the cup was empty, he lowered her head back to the pillow, if the bundled furs could be called that. She found her voice, though it came out whisper thin. Who are you?" "Caleb Boone." He returned to his chair, maintaining distance like a careful animal. "As for where, my place, about 8 miles up the mountain from where I found you." 8 miles. She'd never make it back, even if she wanted to, even if she knew which direction to go. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a second avalanche. "The storm," she managed. "Still blowing. Been 2 days." 2 days. She'd been unconscious for 2 days in a stranger's cabin, completely at his mercy. Yet she was alive, warm, and she did a careful inventory, unharmed save for her injuries from the fall. Her dress had been changed for a rough wool shirt that hung to her knees, but her undergarments seemed untouched. "My clothes, drying." He nodded toward a line strung near the fire where her dress hung like a sad ghost. "Would have killed you, wet as they were. Had to cut the corset off. Damn thing was so tight you couldn't breathe proper." Heat flooded her cheeks despite her weakness. No man had ever spoken to her of undergarments, let alone. "I've seen worse sights in the war, ma'am. Nothing to fuss over." His tone was matter-of-fact, but he kept his eyes on the fire. "You running from something or just fool enough to take a pleasure stroll in a blizzard?" The question hung between them. Eliza closed her eyes, weighing truth against prudent lies. But what was the point of prudence now? She'd already thrown away every safety convention offered. "Running," she whispered. He grunted, apparently unsurprised. "Indians? Outlaws? A wedding?" That made him look at her. One eyebrow raised. She could see him taking in details, her soft hands, the quality of her ruined clothes, the way she spoke, Eastern, Educated. The kind of woman who had no business within 100 miles of here. Roland Sharp, she continued, the name bitter on her tongue. I came from Boston to marry him, but he's not what his letters said. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Sharp. He spoke the name like it was spoiled meat. Big ranch down valley? Mean bastard with pale eyes? You know him. Know of him. Know to stay clear. He stood abruptly, moving to the stove where something bubbled in a black pot. Man's got a reputation. Goes through wives like a normal man goes through horses. The casual word sent ice through her veins. Goes through? 2 dead that I heard of. Accidents. He claimed, 3rd one ran off, they say, though nobody ever saw her again. He ladled whatever was in the pot into a bowl. You got better sense than I credited, running when you did. He brought the bowl to her, some kind of broth that smelled of wild game and herbs. When she struggled to sit up, he matter-of-factly hauled her upright, propping rolled blankets behind her. His hands were gentle despite their size, but he touched her like he'd touch a wounded deer, careful of causing pain but nothing more. The broth was rich and warming. As she ate, she studied her rescuer sidelong. Everything about him spoke of solitude, the economy of movement, the sparse speech, the way he seemed to fill the space while barely disturbing it. This was a man who'd grown used to his own company, who'd made peace with silence. Thank you, she said when the bowl was empty. For saving me, for... She gestured vaguely at her situation. He shrugged. Couldn't leave you to freeze. Wouldn't leave a dog out in that storm. Not exactly gallantry, but she supposed honesty was preferable to pretty lies. She'd had enough of those. The days that followed blurred together in a routine of survival. The storm raged for another day before exhausting itself, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Caleb went about his business, tending the fire, checking traps, cooking simple meals, while Eliza slowly regained strength. He was not an easy man to share space with. He moved through the cabin like it was his sole domain, which of course it was. She learned to read his moods through small signs, the set of his shoulders, the length of his silences. Mostly he ignored her, speaking only when necessary, though she sometimes caught him watching her with those unreadable eyes. On the 4th day, when she could finally stand without the world spinning, she insisted on helping. He watched skeptically as she attempted to tend the fire, nearly smothering it with too much wood. Not like that. He showed her the proper way, how to read the coals, how to place the logs for best draw. His hands guided hers, rough and warm, the first voluntary touch since he'd rescued her. She learned other things by necessity. How to melt snow for water without making it taste of smoke. How to bank the fire at night to keep coals till morning. How to move quietly in the small space. Caleb had a frontiersman's hatred of unnecessary noise. Her finest accomplishment was managing to make coffee that didn't make him grimace. Not bad, he admitted on her 3rd attempt. For an Eastern woman. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd received. At night, he slept on the floor by the fire, giving her the narrow bed built into the wall. She'd protested at first, but the look he'd given her had ended that discussion. She lay awake, listening to the sounds of the cabin, the pop of settling logs, the whisper of snow against walls, his breathing steady and deep. Sometimes he stirred restlessly, muttering words she couldn't catch, fighting battles in his dreams. One night, the dreams were worse. She woke to find him sitting upright, shoulders heaving, sweat gleaming on his face despite the cold. Without thinking, she rose and went to him, placing a careful hand on his shoulder. He flinched but didn't pull away. Sorry, didn't mean to wake you. The war? She asked softly. A long pause. Among other things. She fetched him water, then surprised them both by sitting beside him on the floor. They sat in companionable silence, watching the fire die to embers. My wife used to do that, he said suddenly. Sit with me after the dreams. Said the quiet helped more than words. Your wife? Dead. Her and the boy both. 6 years come spring. The pain in his voice was old but still sharp. like a break that hadn't healed clean. Eliza wanted to ask more, but sensed this was all he could offer, this small glimpse through his armor. As the days passed, a fragile routine developed. She took over the cooking, learning to work with the simple supplies: venison, root vegetables from his cellar, cornmeal, dried beans. He showed her how to make ash cakes in the coals, how to render bear fat for cooking, how to brew pine needle tea that fought off scurvy. In return, she read to him from the one book in the cabin, a battered Bible that looked like it had survived its own wars. His reading was poor, she discovered, though he was far from stupid. He'd simply had little schooling before the war took him young. "Why stay here?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire, she with her mending, he sharpening his knives. "After your loss, why not go somewhere? Easier." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Mountains don't judge," he finally said. "Don't ask questions. Don't care what you've done or who you've been, just whether you're strong enough to survive them." She understood that. After a lifetime of judgments and expectations, the brutal honesty of wilderness held its own appeal. Outside, winter deepened its grip. Inside the small cabin, two damaged souls learned to exist in the same space, like planets establishing careful orbits. Neither spoke of the future, of what would happen when spring came and the paths cleared. For now, there was only survival, only the next meal, the next storm to weather. And if sometimes their eyes met across the fire, holding for a moment longer than necessary, well, that was just another thing they didn't speak of. Not yet. The evening started like any other, with the ritual of preparing supper and the comfortable silence that had grown between them. But something was different, a restlessness in Eliza that made her drop the wooden spoon twice, a tension in Caleb that had him checking the windows more than necessary. "Storm coming," he said, though the sky visible through the window was clear, stars sharp as glass in the cold air. "How can you tell?" "Bones know. Old brakes ache before the weather turns." He rubbed his shoulder absently, where she'd noticed him favoring it on damp days. She served the stew, venison with wild onions and potatoes from his root cellar, and they ate without conversation. But the silence felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken words. Finally, she couldn't bear it. "I need to tell you something, about why I ran." He looked up from his bowl, gray eyes steady. "You don't owe me your story." "Perhaps not, but I want you to know." She set down her spoon, hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl reciting lessons. "I wasn't some romantic fool who thought marriage to a stranger would be an adventure. My father invested poorly, trusted the wrong men. We lost nearly everything. Mother said I had two choices: marry well or watch them descend into poverty. So they sold you." The blunt words should have stung, but there was no judgment in them. Yes, though we all pretended otherwise. Roland Sharp's letters were so beautiful, so full of poetry and promise. He wrote about building a life together, about respect and partnership, lies, all of it. "Men like Sharp know how to bait a trap." She laughed, bitter and short. And I walked right in. 24 years old, and I still believed in fairy stories. Believed a man who'd never met me could love me through letters alone. Nothing wrong with believing," Caleb said quietly. "World's got precious little hope in it as is." The unexpected kindness undid something in her. Words poured out about the train journey, the growing dread, that first sight of Roland's cold eyes, about the barred window and crude ranch hands, the overhead conversation that had sent her flying into the storm. "He spoke of breaking me," she whispered, "like I was a horse to be trained." Caleb's knuckles whitened around his spoon. Man who thinks that way about women ain't a man at all. But that's how it is, isn't it? The law says a wife is property, no different from his cattle or horses. Law says a lot of things, doesn't make them right. He pushed back from the table, pacing to the window. Law said it was fine to own men like property too. Took a war to settle that argument. You fought for the Union? Pennsylvania 48th. 3 years. Till a Confederate shell took half my shoulder off at Petersburg. He turned back to her. Seen enough of men treating others as less than human. Makes my stomach turn. She rose, moving closer to him. In the firelight, she could see the pain etched in the lines of his face, not just from old wounds, but from memories that cut deeper than any blade. I'm sorry. About your family. He stiffened. She'd crossed some invisible line, but she didn't retreat. Don't, he said roughly. Don't. You know my pain. Why can't I know yours? Because yours has an ending. You got away. Mine. He trailed off, jaw working. Tell me. The words seemed pulled from him against his will. Martha, my wife, sweetest woman God ever made. We had a little farm in Missouri, near the Kansas border. Tried to stay neutral when the war came, but there's no neutral in a border state. He moved away from her, hands braced on the table. I joined up after Lawrence burned, figured I was protecting them by fighting, but the war came home anyway. Bushwhackers, Confederate irregulars, hit our place while I was gone. Barn was burning when neighbors found them. Martha and little James. He was only 4. His voice broke. Eliza moved without thinking, placing her hand over his on the table. He didn't pull away. That's why you're here, she said softly. Away from everything. Can't be around people much anymore. Too much noise, too many questions. Up here, there's just the mountains and the seasons. Simple, clean, lonely. He looked at their joined hands. Was, till a fool woman decided to take a walk in a blizzard. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Eliza felt her heart racing. Knew she should pull her hand back, return to safe distance. Instead, she turned his hand over, tracing the calluses and scars with one finger. I'm glad I took that walk, she whispered. He caught her hand, stilling its movement. For a moment they stood frozen, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Then he stepped back, releasing her. It's late. The dismissal stung, but she understood. They'd already said too much, revealed too much. She retreated to her bed, leaving him staring into the fire. But things had shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained began to erode, worn away by small intimacies. A hand that lingered when passing a plate. Eyes that held a moment too long. The space between them when they worked side by side, charged with awareness. She learned the rhythm of his days and shaped hers to complement them. When he went to check his trap lines, she had hot coffee waiting on his return. When she struggled with the heavy water bucket, he appeared without being asked. They moved around each other in the small space like dancers learning the steps. One afternoon, disaster struck. Caleb was splitting wood when the axe glanced off a knot, slicing deep into his palm. He cursed, blood welling between his fingers. Let me see. Eliza was at his side immediately. It's nothing. Nothing doesn't bleed like that. Come inside. She bullied him into the cabin, made him sit while she fetched clean cloth and the bottle of whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. His hand was large in both of hers as she cleaned the wound, trying not to think about how his skin felt, the way his breath hitched when the alcohol bit. You've done this before, he observed. Mother believed all women should know basic doctoring. Hold still. She focused on the neat stitches, not on his nearness, not on the heat radiating from him. When she finished, she realized he was studying her with an expression she'd never seen before, something soft and wondering and dangerous. What? Nothing, just your hands, so small, but steady, gentle but strong. He flexed his bandaged hand. Thank you. You saved my life. This hardly balances the scales. There are no scales between us, Eliza. Her name on his lips sent warmth flooding through her. He rarely used it, usually just ma'am or nothing at all. That night, the storm he'd predicted arrived with a vengeance. Wind howled around the cabin like a living thing, finding every crack and crevice. Snow piled against the door until they were sealed in completely. Could be days, Caleb said, eyeing the rafters as they creaked under the wind's assault. Hope you don't get tired of my company. I think I can manage. They settled by the fire, she with her mending, he fashioning snares from rawhide. The domesticity of it struck her, like an old married couple, comfortable in their routines. What would it be like, she wondered, to have this always, to build a life with someone in mutual respect and quiet understanding? Why didn't you remarry? The question escaped before she could stop it. After he was quiet so long she thought he'd refuse to answer. Didn't seem fair. To her memory or to any woman fool enough to take on a broken man. You're not broken. Ain't whole neither. She set aside her sewing, choosing her words carefully. Perhaps none of us are meant to be whole alone. Perhaps we're meant to find someone whose broken pieces fit with ours. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt exposed as she had that first night, but differently. This was a choosing to be seen. That what you think we are? Broken pieces? I ran for my life in a wedding dress, nearly died in a storm, and the thought of going back terrifies me more than death. Yes, I think I qualify as broken. You're the strongest woman I've met. How many women have you met up here on your mountain? It was meant as a joke, but he answered seriously. Enough to know, you survived Sharp. You survived the storm. You're surviving this. He gestured around the cabin. When most Eastern ladies would be crying for their servants. I've considered it. The crying part, at least. That surprised a laugh out of him. The first real laugh she'd heard. It transformed his face, showing glimpses of who he might have been before loss carved those lines around his eyes. Well, when you do, give me warning. I'll go check the trap lines. Nothing unmans a fellow like female tears. I'll try to schedule my breakdowns conveniently. They smiled at each other across the fire, and Eliza felt something click into place. Not passion, not yet, but possibility. A future that wasn't planned or purchased, but chosen. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, two broken souls began the careful work of fitting their edges together, finding that perhaps the spaces between their scars aligned in ways neither had expected. The wind howled, the snow fell, and somewhere in the darkness between midnight and dawn, Eliza realized she no longer thought of this as Caleb's cabin where she was sheltering. Somewhere along the way, it had become home. The kiss changed everything and nothing. For 3 days after that night by the fire, they moved around each other like skittish deer, careful not to touch, barely meeting eyes. Caleb threw himself into unnecessary work, rechecking trap lines he'd checked the day before, splitting enough wood for 2 winters, mending harnesses that didn't need mending. Eliza attacked the cabin with desperate domesticity, scrubbing surfaces already clean, reorganizing supplies that needed no organizing. The silence between them was different now, not comfortable, but charged, like the air before lightning strikes. Every accidental brush of hands sent sparks through her. Every time she caught him watching her, heat bloomed in her cheeks. On the 3rd night, she couldn't bear it anymore. We're being foolish, she announced over supper. He looked up from his plate, wary. How's that? Acting like children who've been caught stealing pie. We kissed. The world didn't end. Didn't it? His voice was rough. Eliza, you don't understand. Then explain it to me. She set down her fork with more force than necessary. Because from where I sit, you're punishing us both for one moment of human connection. Human connection. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. That what you call it? What would you call it? He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. A mistake. You're a lady from Boston. He gestured at himself, at the rough cabin around them. This ain't your world. Come spring, you'll go back where you belong. Where I belong? Anger flared hot in her chest. You mean back to Roland Sharp? Back to being sold like cattle? Back to civilization, to proper houses and proper people and proper cages. She stood too, facing him across the table. That's what you're sending me back to. A world where I'm property, where my wants don't matter, where I'll spend my life pouring tea and pretending to be empty-headed. Better than this. His gesture encompassed the cabin again. Better than isolation and hardship and a man who wakes up screaming more nights than not. You don't get to decide what's better for me. And you don't get to romanticize this life because you're running from something worse." They glared at each other, breathing hard. Then Eliza did something that surprised them both. She laughed, not the polite titter of a Boston drawing room, but real laughter. Almost wild. "Listen to us, fighting about a future neither of us can predict while snow has us trapped like rats in a barrel." She moved around the table, stopping just out of his reach. "I'm not romanticizing anything. Caleb Boone, I've hauled water till my arms ached, eaten beans till I dreamed of them, woken to frost on the blankets. I know exactly how hard this life is." "Do you?" "Yes, and I also know that for the first time in my life, I wake up without dread, without feeling like I'm suffocating. That's worth more than all the tea parties in Boston." He turned away, bracing his hands on the mantel. "You say that now, but loneliness eats at you. Eliza, winters are long up here." "I've been lonely my whole life," she said softly, "in a house full of people who saw me as currency. At least here, the loneliness is honest." "And what happens when it's not enough? When you realize you've tied yourself to a broken-down soldier who can barely read, who has nightmares about dead children, who—" She crossed the remaining distance between them, placing her hand on his arm. "Who saved my life? Who treats me with respect? Who looks at me and sees a person, not a possession?" He turned at her touch, and she saw the war in his eyes. Hope battling fear, desire fighting duty. "I can't be what you deserve," he whispered. "Then be what you are. That's all I'm asking." For a long moment, they stood frozen. Then something in him seemed to break. He pulled her against him, not roughly but with desperate certainty, and kissed her like a drowning man gasping for air. This kiss was nothing like the first. No tentative sweetness, no careful exploration. This was need and fear and longing all tangled together. Her hands fisted in his shirt, holding on as the world tilted and spun. When they broke apart, both breathing raggedly, he rested his forehead against hers. "This is madness," he murmured. "Yes," she agreed. "The best kind." He laughed then, short and breathless. "You're going to be the death of me, woman. Better me than the mountains." They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, while the fire crackled and the wind sang through the chinks in the walls. Finally, he stepped back, but kept her hands in his. "If we do this," he paused, seeming to gather his thoughts, "I won't have you staying out of pity or obligation. When spring comes, if you want to leave, Caleb," she squeezed his hands, "I'm here because I choose to be. Can that be enough for now?" He studied her face, then nodded slowly. "For now." The days that followed were a delicate dance of new intimacy. They still worked side by side, but now he might catch her waist as she passed, holding her for a moment against him. She would smooth his hair back when serving his coffee, letting her fingers linger. At night, they sat closer by the fire, her feet tucked against his thigh, his hand resting on her ankle. They talked more too. Not the careful conversations of before, but real sharing. He told her about growing up poor in Pennsylvania, about joining the army as much for the steady pay as patriotism. She spoke of the suffocating expectations of Boston society, the constant performance required of women of her class. "I was an excellent actress," she said one evening, working on patching one of his shirts. "Smiling when I wanted to scream, agreeing when I wanted to argue. Mother said I had a talent for it." Glad you gave up the stage," he said from where he was oiling his rifle. "I prefer you honest." "Even when I'm honestly irritating?" "Especially then." But shadows still lingered. She would catch him watching her with something like grief in his eyes, as if already mourning her loss. At night, the nightmares continued. She learned not to touch him when he woke gasping. He'd warned her that he might lash out, still caught in dream battles. Instead, she would speak softly, calling him back with mundane observations about the fire needing tending or coffee being ready. One particularly bad night. He sat shaking for almost an hour, unable to shake the dream's grip. Finally, desperate, she began to sing, an old lullaby her nurse had taught her. His breathing gradually slowed, the trembling eased. "Martha used to hum," he said hoarsely. When the baby was fretful? Would you tell me about them, if it's not too painful? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he began to speak. About Martha's laugh, like silver bells. About little James, who'd inherited his mother's golden hair and his father's stubborn chin. Small memories, jam-making, harvest dances, bedtime stories. Sometimes I can't remember their faces clear, he admitted. Like looking through dirty glass. That's the worst part. She moved then, settling beside him on the floor. Not touching but close enough that he could feel her warmth. Tell me more. Help them be clear again. So he did. Through the long hours until dawn, and when the sun finally broke through the windows, something had shifted again. The ghosts were still there, would always be there, but perhaps they could coexist with the living. A week later, Eliza made a decision. While Caleb was out checking his farthest trap line, a journey that would keep him away most of the day, she did something she'd been considering since that first kiss. She took off her wedding dress from where it hung, still waiting like a specter of her old life. With Caleb's sharp knife, she began cutting it apart. The beautiful silk became cleaning rags, bandages, patches for worn clothing. The pearl buttons she saved in a jar. They could be traded come spring. The lace she fashioned into curtains for the small window. When Caleb returned at dusk, he stopped short in the doorway, taking in the changes. You cut up your dress. It was taking up space. She kept her tone light, but her heart hammered. Besides, I have no use for a wedding dress. He moved into the cabin slowly, setting down his pack. That was worth good money. You could have sold it. To whom? The wolves. She turned from the stove where she was stirring the rabbit stew. It was a costume for a play I'm no longer performing. Now it's useful. I call that a good trade. He fingered one of the new curtains, his expression unreadable. Eliza. I'm not trying to trap you, she said quickly. I needed to do it, to close that door properly. He crossed to her then, cupping her face in his hands. You extraordinary woman. Is that good or bad? Both. Neither. It just is. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally, her lips, soft, reverent touches. You humble me. I don't mean to. I know. That's what makes it worse. But he was almost smiling. Come on, that stew smells too good to let burn. That night, as they prepared for sleep in their separate spaces, Caleb spoke from his place by the fire. I'm glad you cut up the dress. Why? Because now I know you're staying for sure. No woman destroys a silk dress unless she means to stick around. She smiled in the darkness. Good night, Caleb. Good night, Eliza. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside the cabin was warm with more than fire. Two souls were learning that perhaps broken didn't mean ruined. Sometimes it just meant there were more edges to fit together, more ways to let the light in. The change came subtly at first, a softening in the air, icicles dripping from the eaves in steady percussion. Caleb stood in the doorway one morning, studying the sky with the intensity of a man reading scripture. Thaw's coming early, he said, and Eliza heard what he didn't say. Time was running short. She joined him, wrapping her shawl tight against the still bitter air. Below them, the valley remained locked in white, but there were signs for those who knew to look. Dark patches where snow had pulled back from tree trunks, the distant sound of running water beneath ice. How long before the paths clear? Few weeks, maybe less if this warm spell holds. He glanced at her, then away. Roads to town will be passable soon after. The unspoken question hung between them like morning mist. What would happen when the world opened up again? When isolation no longer forced them together? That evening, Caleb surprised her by pulling out materials he'd been saving. Better paper than their usual rough brown. A pen with a proper nib. You should write to your people, he said gruffly. Let them know you're alive. I suppose I should. She took the materials reluctantly. What could she possibly say? Dear Mother and Father, I ran from the marriage you arranged, nearly died in a blizzard, and now live with a mountain man who makes me happier than I ever dreamed possible. She spent hours crafting careful words, settling finally on vague truths. She was safe. She was well. She would not be returning to Boston. Let them think what they would. Will you post it when you go to town? If that's what you want. Caleb. She set down the pen. We need to talk about what happens when... Not yet. He stood abruptly. Still got weeks of winter. No sense borrowing trouble. But trouble had a way of finding them regardless. It started with small things. Caleb began teaching her skills she'd need if she stayed. Really stayed. How to shoot his rifle, though the kick nearly knocked her down the first time. How to set snares, read weather signs, identify which plants would return come spring. Why are you showing me this? She asked one afternoon as he demonstrated how to skin a rabbit efficiently. Might need to know someday, he said without looking up. If I'm here, even if you're not, skills worth having either way. But she saw through his careful neutrality. He was preparing for two futures. One where she stayed, one where she left, building walls around his heart even as he taught her to survive without him. The distance hurt more than his earlier coldness had. They still worked together, still sat by the fire in the evenings. But something essential had withdrawn. He touched her less, spoke of future seasons in terms of I rather than we. One night, unable to bear it, she confronted him. He was sharpening his knives, an endless task he turned to when anxious. You're already saying goodbye, she accused. He didn't deny it. Better to do it gradual than all at once. Better for whom? Both of us. Liar. She moved to kneel beside his chair, forcing him to look at her. You're protecting yourself, building walls so it won't hurt when I leave, except I'm not planning to leave. Plans change, not mine. Eliza. He set down the knife, running a hand through his hair. You say that now, here, with no other choice, but when town's available again. When you remember what you're missing? What, hot baths and gossip, dance cards and calling cards, prison cells lined with silk. She gripped his hands, rough with work now. No longer the soft hands of a Boston lady. I've had 3 months to remember what I'm missing. I don't want it. You can't know that. Not really. Not until you have the choice. She released him, sitting back on her heels. So, what do you propose? That I go to town, sample civilization again to be sure? Maybe. And if I come back? Then you come back. But doubt colored every word. She stood, anger and hurt warring in her chest. You don't believe I will. I believe you think you will, right now. But thinking and doing, he shrugged. You won't even fight for us. Fight what? The whole world? Your family? The fact that you deserve better than... Stop. She held up her hand. Just stop. I'm tired of you deciding what I deserve. I'm tired of you pushing me away to save yourself pain. Her voice broke. I'm tired of loving a man who won't let himself be loved. The words hung in the air like struck bells. She hadn't meant to say it. Love. Too big, too soon, too impossible. Caleb had gone very still. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You don't love me. Don't I? You can't. You're just grateful. Mixed up from the situation, when you get some distance, she laughed, wild and bitter. Distance? You want distance? Fine. She grabbed her shawl and stormed out into the night. The cold hit like a slap, but she kept walking, needing space, needing air that didn't smell like him. Her feet found the familiar path to the overlook where she'd often sat to think. The moon was new, leaving only stars for light. Below, the valley stretched silver and black, beautiful and pitiless. She could die out here, she realized. One wrong step, one bad storm, and the mountains would claim her as surely as they'd almost claimed her that first night. But that wasn't what frightened her. What frightened her was the thought of returning to her old life, of pretending the last 3 months hadn't changed her fundamentally, of never again feeling as alive as she did in that small cabin with its taciturn occupant. She didn't hear him approach. He moved silent as always. But suddenly he was there, draping his coat around her shoulders. "Fool woman, come back before you freeze. I thought you wanted distance." "Not like this." He pulled her back against his chest, wrapping his arms around her. "Never like this." They stood in silence, watching their breath cloud in the cold air. Finally, he spoke, words rumbling through his chest into her back. "I loved Martha since we were children. Never imagined loving anyone else. When she died, I thought that part of me died too. Welcomed it, even easier to be stoned than to feel that kind of pain again." She stayed quiet, afraid to break the spell of his confession. "Then you crashed into my life, half dead and fighting still, supposed to be temporary, just until you healed. But you," he tightened his arms around her, "you brought something back to life I thought was buried, and it terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I already lost everything once. Don't think I could survive it twice." She turned in his arms, looking up at his face in the starlight. "So you'll push me away first, save yourself the pain by causing it?" "I'm a coward." Simple statement of fact. "No." She reached up, framing his face with her hands. "You're the bravest man I know. But you're wrong about one thing. You won't lose me, not unless you drive me away." "How can you be sure?" "Because I've already been through my worst nightmare, trapped in a life others chose for me. After that, everything else is just weather." She pulled his head down, pressing her forehead to his. "I choose you, Caleb Boone. I choose this life. Stop trying to unchoose it for me." He shuddered against her, the last walls crumbling. When he kissed her, it was with desperation and surrender both, like a man giving up a fight he'd never wanted to win. "I love you," he said against her lips. "God help me, I love you. About time you admitted it." He laughed, short and breathless. "Stubborn woman." "Stubborn man. Come back inside. Let me show you how stubborn." There was promise in his voice that sent heat through her despite the cold. She let him lead her back to the cabin, back to warmth and light and the fragile, growing thing between them. Inside, he built up the fire while she shed the layers of cold clothing. When he turned back to her, something had shifted in his expression, the careful distance finally, fully gone. "If you stay," he said slowly, "it won't be easy. I'll still have nightmares, still have days when the ghosts are louder than the living, still be a broken-down soldier who—" She silenced him with a kiss. "If you make one more list of your faults, I'll brave the snow again. I know who you are. Caleb, all of it. And I'm still here." "Why?" Genuine bewilderment in the question. "Because you see me, not the Boston lady or the runaway bride or any of the roles I've played. Just me. Because you make me laugh. Because you make me feel safe and challenged and alive all at once." She smiled. "Because you make terrible coffee but excellent rabbit stew." "Those are reasons?" "The best reasons. The only ones that matter." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right then. All right. You want to stay. You stay, I'll stop pushing, stop deciding for you." He pulled her close. "But come spring, we do this proper. Go to town, send your letter, face whatever needs facing. Then, if you still choose this, choose me, we make it official, legal, binding. Are you proposing, Mr. Boone? Promising to propose, when you're sure, when there's no doubt left for either of us. I have no doubts now. Humor me. Let me court you proper when the snow melts. Let me prove I can be the man you deserve." She saw the need in his eyes, not just for her certainty, but for his own redemption. The chance to do right what had gone so wrong with Roland Sharp. "Very well. But I warn you, I have very high standards for courtship. Flowers, poetry, the works. I'll manage something." He was smiling now, that rare, transformative expression. "Might even shave. Let's not go crazy." They laughed together, the sound filling the small cabin with warmth. Outside, the thaw continued its patient work, promising change, promising spring. But inside, two hearts had finally found their rhythm, beating in time through the last weeks of winter. The riders appeared at the edge of the clearing like wolves scenting prey, 4 men on horseback, dark shapes against the melting snow. Caleb spotted them first from where he was repairing the roof, his body going still in that way that meant danger. "Inside," he said quietly to Eliza, who was hanging wash on the line. "Now." She didn't question, didn't hesitate. 3 months of mountain living had taught her to read his warnings. She moved quickly but calmly to the cabin, hearing him follow close behind. Through the window, they watched the riders approach, even at a distance. She recognized the pale eyes of the lead man. "Roland," she breathed, "and 3 of his boys." Caleb was already checking his rifle, movements efficient and calm. "Stay back from the windows. Let me handle this. He's here for me. He's here for property he thinks he owns. Not the same thing." He looked at her then, gray eyes hard as granite. "You're not property. Eliza, not his, not mine, not anyone's. Remember that." The riders stopped just outside comfortable shooting range. Roland was many things, but not stupid. His voice carried clear across the distance. "Boone, I know you've got her. Send out what's mine and we ride away peaceful." Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle held casual but ready. "Nothing here belongs to you, Sharp. Legal papers say different. Woman signed a contract, took money that wasn't refunded, makes her a thief on top of a runaway. Contract was for marriage. No marriage happened. Seems simple enough even for you to understand." Roland's laugh was ugly. "You always were too smart for your own good. Boone, living up here like some kind of hermit, thinking you're better than the rest of us. But you made a mistake taking what's mine." "I didn't take anything. Found a half-dead woman in a snowstorm and kept her alive. Christian charity. Nothing more." "That so? Then you won't mind handing her over. Can't hand over what doesn't belong to you." Through the crack in the door, Eliza watched the standoff. Part of her wanted to go out, to face Roland herself, but she understood Caleb's strategy. Out there, she became a prize to be fought over. In here, she remained a person with choices. One of Roland's men. A scarred brute she remembered from the ranch. Spoke up. "Could burn him out, boss. Smoke usually changes a man's mind right quick." "Try it," Caleb said conversationally. "First man to light a torch gets a bullet. Won't miss at this range." "You can't shoot all 4 of us," Roland pointed out. "No, but I can shoot you first. Your boys might get me after, but you'll be too dead to enjoy it." Caleb smiled. "And it was a terrible thing. Course, there's another problem with your plan." "What's that?" "You burn my cabin. You burn her too. Don't think you came all this way to collect a corpse." Roland's face darkened. "She's alive, then?" "Was an hour ago. Woman's got a delicate constitution, though all this excitement might be too much for her heart." The lie came smooth as honey. "Be a real shame if she took ill sudden-like. You're bluffing. Maybe. You willing to bet money on it? Because that's what she is to you, isn't it? Money, investment. Take away that value and what's left?" Through the window, Eliza saw Roland's jaw work as he calculated. She knew that look, weighing profit against risk. The same expression he'd worn when examining horses. "Here's what's going to happen," Roland said finally. "You're going to send her out. She's going to get on my horse. We're going to leave peaceful. Otherwise, things get unpleasant." "Unpleasant," Caleb repeated. "Like what you did to your first 2 wives." A dangerous silence fell. "Careful. Boone, man could take offense at accusations like that. Not accusing, just noting facts. Mary Sharp died of a fall downstairs. Funny how clumsy she got after marriage. Sarah Sharp drowned in the creek behind your house. Barely 2 feet of water, but somehow she couldn't get up. Accidents. Sheriff said so. Sheriff you pay for said so." Caleb shifted slightly, rifle adjusting with the movement. "But we both know truth has a way of surfacing. Maybe someone should take another look at those accidents." "You threatening me?" "Observing. Same as you're observing that cabin windows make fine shooting positions. Same as you're observing that the snow's melting fast, making it hard to move quiet. Same as I'm observing that Jake Morrison there is favoring his left side, old wound, acting up." "Jake?" The scarred man shifted uncomfortably. These men were used to intimidating farmers and townfolk, not someone who'd learned patience and marksmanship in 3 years of war. Roland tried a different approach. "What's your price? Boon? Every man's got one." "Not for sale. Everything's for sale. The woman bring you that much comfort on cold nights? I'll send you 2 more, younger and prettier." Eliza saw Caleb's shoulders tense, the first sign of real anger. "Choose your next words careful. Sharp, real careful. Or what? You'll shoot me in front of witnesses? Hang for murder over some runaway piece of—" The rifle cracked. Roland's hat flew off his head. A neat hole punched through the crown. The horses danced nervously as their riders fought to control them. "That was your one warning," Caleb said calmly. "Next one goes lower." Roland's face had gone pale, then red with rage. "You're going to regret that. Add it to the list." Caleb hadn't moved. Rifle already lined up again. "Now, you boys got a choice. Ride away now. Forget this foolishness. Or stay, and we'll see how it plays out. But either way, Miss Whitlow makes her own decisions. She wants to go with you. I won't stop her. She wants to stay. You won't take her. Simple as that. Let me talk to her then. Let me hear from her own mouth what she wants." Caleb glanced back at the cabin. Through the cracked door, their eyes met. She nodded slightly. "Your choice," he said quietly. "But I'm right here." Eliza stepped onto the porch, head high despite her racing heart. She'd changed in 3 months. No longer the soft Eastern lady who'd fled in terror. The mountains had hardened her, given her steel she hadn't known she possessed. "Hello, Roland." His pale eyes traveled over her, taking in the simple dress, the work-roughened hands, the way she stood close to Caleb without touching. "Look at you, playing frontier wife. Your parents would be appalled. My parents sold me to a monster. Their opinion ceased to matter." "Monster?" He pressed a hand to his chest in mock hurt. "Such harsh words for your betrothed. You were never my betrothed. You were a business transaction that I choose to void. You don't get to choose. Contract was signed, a contract obtained through fraud. Those letters you sent, did you copy them from a book? Have someone else write them? Because they certainly didn't come from the man I met." His jaw tightened. "You took money, which I'll repay. Every cent, with interest. But I won't be your property." "Property." He laughed. "Is that what he's been telling you? Filling your head with ideas? Look around. Woman. You traded one cabin for another. One man for another. You think you're free up here? You're just his—" "Choose your words very careful," Caleb interrupted softly. Roland's smile was vicious. "Truth hurt. Boon? She warming your bed just like she would have warmed mine. Only difference is—" This time, Eliza moved. The bucket of wash water sat by the door. She grabbed it and hurled the contents at Roland. The cold, soapy water caught him full in the face, drenching him. Sputtering, he clawed at his eyes. His men reached for weapons, then froze as Caleb's rifle swung toward them. "You bitch!" Roland gasped. "You'll pay for that." "Send me a bill," Eliza said coolly. "Add it to what I owe you. Now get off this land before I find something worse than wash water. This isn't over." "Yes, it is." She stepped forward, no longer afraid. "Because if you come back, if you send your men, if you so much as whisper my name in town, I'll make sure everyone knows what really happened to your wives. I wrote it all down, every suspicion, every story I heard from the servants before I ran. That letter I sent to my parents? It included another letter, sealed, with instructions to open it if anything happens to me." A lie. But Roland didn't know that. She saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. "You're bluffing, maybe, but are you willing to risk it? Your reputation, your business, all for one runaway bride who won't ever submit to you anyway." She smiled, cold as the mountain wind. "I'm not worth it. Roland, we both know that." Long seconds passed. Finally, Roland yanked his horse's head around. "This isn't finished," he said, but the threat sounded hollow now. "It is for me," she replied. They watched the riders disappear into the tree line. Only when they were truly gone did Eliza's knees buckle. Caleb caught her, pulled her against him. "Wash water. he said into her hair. "That's your weapon of choice. It worked, didn't it? Remind me never to make you angry when you're doing laundry." She laughed, shaky with relief. "Do you think he'll come back?" "No. Men like Sharp are cowards at heart. Push back hard enough and they fold." He pulled back to look at her face. "That was dangerous. What you did, coming out here. I couldn't let you face him alone. Not for me. I'd face down 100 men for you. I know. That's why I couldn't let you." She touched his face, traced the line of his jaw. "We face things together now. That's what partners do." He caught her hand, pressed it to his lips. "Partners, unless you're rescinding your promise to court me properly." "Never, though you may have complicated my plans. Hard to impress a woman who throws water in the face of danger. I'm sure you'll manage something." They went inside together, Caleb barring the door out of habit. The cabin felt different now. No longer a refuge from the world, but a home they'd defended together. That night, as they sat by the fire, Eliza found herself thinking not of Roland or danger or the confrontation, but of the way Caleb had called her his partner. Not his woman, not his property, but partner. "What are you smiling about?" he asked. "The future," she said. "Our future. That's worth smiling about?" "Yes." She moved to sit beside him, fitting herself against his side. "Because for the first time in my life, I get to choose it." He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. Outside, the spring wind sang through the peaks, carrying the scent of melting snow and new beginnings. The threat of Roland Sharp was fading like winter, leaving room for something green and growing. They had won more than a confrontation. They had claimed the right to their own story, written by their own hands, on their own terms. And that, Eliza thought as she dozed against Caleb's shoulder, was worth any battle. The town of Cedar Ridge sprawled before them like a foreign country, after months in mountain solitude. The noise and bustle felt overwhelming. Dogs barking, wheels creaking, voices calling across the muddy main street. Eliza found herself pressing closer to Caleb on the wagon seat, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Bigger than you remembered?" he asked, noting her tension. "Louder," she admitted. "Has it always smelled like this?" "Horse dung and humanity? Pretty much." He guided the team around a particularly deep puddle. "We can turn back. Don't have to do this today." "Yes, we do." She straightened her spine, lifted her chin. "I won't have Roland or anyone else saying I'm hiding." They'd come down from the mountain 2 days after the confrontation, once Caleb was sure Roland wouldn't be lying in ambush. The journey that had nearly killed her in winter took only hours in spring sunshine. The trail clear and almost pleasant. Now, faced with civilization again, she wondered if she'd made a mistake. People stared as they passed. She recognized some faces from her brief time at the Sharp Ranch, the store clerk who'd fitted her wedding shoes, the seamstress who'd altered her dress. Whispers followed in their wake like ripples on water. "That's her, the runaway bride, living up the mountain with Boone all winter. Bold as brass, showing her face here." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he kept driving steady toward their destination. Sheriff Thompson's office. They had business to conduct, statements to make, a record to set straight. The sheriff was a weathered man in his 50s, with keen eyes that missed little. He listened without interruption as Eliza told her story. The deceptive letters, the fear that drove her to flee, the rescue in the storm. "You willing to swear to all this in writing?" he asked when she finished. "I am. And you?" He looked at Caleb. "You'll testify you found her near dead, no impropriety involved." "I'll testify I saved her life," Caleb said evenly. "Rest is nobody's business." Thompson's mouth quirked. "Fair enough. Roland's already been in, claiming theft and breach of contract. But seems to me a woman's got a right to change her mind before the vows are spoke. She'll repay the dowry," Caleb said. "Every cent. I'll repay it," Eliza corrected. "With money I earn myself." Both men looked at her in surprise. "Doing what?" Thompson asked. "I read, write, and figure well. I can keep books, write letters, teach children." She met his gaze steadily. Surely a growing town has need of such skills. Maybe so. The sheriff seemed amused. You planning to stay in town then? No. She glanced at Caleb. But I'll come down as needed. I won't be a burden to anyone. Sure, never said you were. Caleb muttered. They completed the paperwork, Eliza signing her statement with a steady hand. As they left the sheriff's office, she spotted a familiar figure across the street. Mrs. Crane, Roland's housekeeper, entering the general store. Wait here, she told Caleb. Eliza, I need to do this. She crossed the street before he could protest, following Mrs. Crane into the store. The older woman turned at the bell's chime, face hardening when she saw who'd entered. Mrs. Crane. Miss Whitlow. The title dripped with disdain. Or should I say Mrs. Boone now? Still Miss Whitlow, Eliza said calmly. I wanted to ask you something. I have nothing to say to you. About Mary and Sarah Sharp. You worked in that house. You knew them. Mrs. Crane's face went very still. I don't gossip about my employers. Even when they're dead? Even when you know the truth? Eliza stepped closer, lowering her voice. I saw your face when he talked about training me like a horse. You weren't surprised. You'd heard it before. Leave the past buried, girl. Nothing good comes of digging up old graves. 2 women are dead. Doesn't that matter? For a moment, something flickered in the housekeeper's eyes. Guilt, perhaps. Or old grief. Then the hardness returned. What matters is keeping body and soul together. I got no family, no other prospects. Roland Sharp pays my wages regular. That's all that matters. You could have warned me. Could have. Mrs. Crane moved toward the door. Didn't. Same as I didn't warn them. That's my sin to carry, not yours. She paused at the threshold. You got away. Be grateful and let it lie. After she left, Eliza stood among the barrels and shelves, anger and pity warring in her chest. How many people knew Roland's nature? How many stayed silent for coins in their pocket? Ma'am, the shopkeeper, Mr. Peterson, approached nervously. Can I help you with something? She turned, saw him taking in her simple dress, her work-worn hands, calculating whether she could afford his goods. Yes, she said suddenly. I need writing paper, ink, and sealing wax. Your best quality. That might be expensive. I can pay. She had the money Caleb had insisted she take. Earnings from furs he'd trapped, he said, though she suspected he was giving her more than her fair share. As Peterson gathered her purchases, she noticed the small sign in his window. Clerk wanted, must read and write. Still looking for help? She asked. Been 2 months. Not many folks around here have the schooling. He paused. You interested? Perhaps 2 days a week. Fair wages, and I choose my own hours. He blinked at her directness. I'd have to think on it. Not usual. Hiring a woman for such work. Think quickly. I won't be the only one asking. She paid for her purchases, adding, Good day, Mr. Peterson. Outside, she found Caleb surrounded by a small crowd. Her heart jumped until she realized they weren't threatening, just townsmen catching up with someone they rarely saw. Lost 2 horses in that late storm. One was saying, Found 'em frozen stiff come thaw. Bad winter all around. Another agreed. Though seems some folk found ways to keep warm. The sly comment brought snickers. Caleb's face remained impassive, but Eliza saw the tension in his shoulders. Gentlemen, she said pleasantly, taking Caleb's arm. Lovely day, isn't it? Though I suppose after this past winter, any day without blizzards seems lovely. The men shifted, suddenly awkward. One tipped his hat. Miss Whitlow, heard you had some trouble with Roland Sharp. A misunderstanding, now resolved. She smiled, showing teeth. I'm sure Mr. Sharp will find a more suitable bride elsewhere. Perhaps someone who doesn't mind being compared to livestock. Someone coughed, covering what might have been a laugh. Roland wasn't well liked, she realized, feared and tolerated for his wealth, but not liked. Ready to go? Caleb asked quietly. One more stop. The church sat at the town's edge, white-painted and modest. Reverend Mills was in the garden, tending early vegetables. He straightened as they approached, no judgment in his weathered face. Miss Whitlow, Mr. Boone, what brings you by? A question, Eliza said, about marriages. Specifically, what makes them legal and binding in the eyes of God and law? Thinking of the future, are we? His eyes twinkled. Well, there's the legal side, licenses, witnesses, signatures. And there's the spiritual side, vows made freely, promises kept faithfully. Can't have one without the other and call it true marriage. Freely made, she repeated. That's important? Central to it. Marriage under compulsion is no marriage at all. In my understanding, God wants willing hearts, not forced compliance. Thank you. She glanced at Caleb. We may have more questions later. My door's always open. As they walked back to the wagon, Caleb was quiet. Finally, as they reached the edge of town, he spoke. You handled that well, all of it. I was terrified, she admitted. But it had to be done. I won't have people thinking I'm hiding in shame. Nobody who matters thinks that. They think I'm your... She paused, searching for appropriate words. That I traded one protector for another. Let them think it. His hands tightened on the reins. I've been called worse. But it's not true. You've been nothing but honorable. I won't have your reputation ruined because of me. Eliza. He pulled the wagon to a stop. Turning to face her. My reputation was ruined long before you came. Hermit. They call me Crazy Mountain Man. Adding man who sheltered a runaway woman to the list doesn't much matter. It matters to me. He studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right. Then we court proper, like I promised, public and respectable. Let them see the truth of it. Starting when? Starting now. He reached under the seat, pulled out a small wrapped package. Was going to wait till we got home, but maybe better to do it here, where folks can see. She opened it carefully. Inside was a tortoiseshell comb, delicate and beautiful, carved with tiny flowers. It's not much, he said gruffly. But I remembered you saying your mother had one like it. Caleb, her throat tight. It's perfect. May I? He took the comb, carefully placing it in her hair. His fingers lingered against her neck, and she shivered despite the warm sun. From the corner of her eye, she saw curtains twitching in nearby houses. Good. Let them see this. Caleb Boone courting her respectably, treating her like a lady worth winning. There's something else, he said. Question I've been meaning to ask. Her heart raced. Surely not here. Not now. Will you come to the spring dance with me? It's next month. Whole town turns out. Dancing, food, socializing. He grimaced. Not my usual choice, but you'd suffer it for me? Appears so. She laughed, delighted. Mr. Boone, are you asking me to walk out with you, in front of the whole town? I'm asking you to dance with me, Miss Whitlow, one evening. See how it goes. I accept. She touched the comb in her hair. Though you should know, I'm an excellent dancer. You may have to practice. Practice. He sighed deeply. What have I gotten myself into? As they drove away from town, climbing back toward their mountain, Eliza felt lighter than she had in days. The confrontation was over, the record set straight, the future opening before them like the valley spreading below. Thank you, she said softly. For today. For everything. You did the hard parts yourself. I meant for seeing me as worth the trouble. For standing beside me back there. Eliza. He reached over, covered her hand with his. You're worth any amount of trouble. Time you started believing it. She laced her fingers through his, holding tight as the wagon climbed higher, behind them. Cedar Ridge grew small with distance. Ahead, their mountain waited, no longer a refuge from the world but a home they'd chosen together. The spring dance was a month away. By then, everyone would know the truth, that Eliza Whitlow was no man's property, no runaway to be reclaimed. but a woman who'd chosen her own path and the man she'd walk it with. Let them whisper. She and Caleb would give them something better to talk about. Spring arrived in full glory, painting the mountains with wildflowers and filling the air with bird song. The cabin that had been their winter fortress transformed into something else, a home, being prepared for a future. Caleb added a room, working from dawn to dusk when he wasn't hunting or tending the garden Eliza had insisted on planting. "We'll need vegetables come winter," she'd said, though they both knew it was about more than food. It was about roots, about planning for seasons yet to come. The spring dance came and went, a triumph of sorts. Caleb, clean-shaven and uncomfortable in his best clothes, had managed 3 dances without stepping on her feet. The town had watched, whispered, and gradually accepted what they saw, a courtship proper and true, whatever its unconventional beginning. Now, on a morning bright with promise, Eliza stood in their garden watching Caleb work on the new room. His shirt was off in the warm sun, scars mapping stories across his back, war, survival, a life hard-lived but not defeated. "You're staring," he said without turning around, admiring my view. She didn't bother hiding the warmth in her voice. 3 months of proper courtship hadn't dimmed the spark between them. If anything, the deliberate patience had stoked it higher. He set down his hammer, turned to face her. "Got something to show you." She followed him to the new room, gasping when she saw inside. He'd built shelves along one wall, proper shelves for books, with a writing desk beneath the window. "Know you miss your books," he said gruffly. "Figured when we go to town, you could start collecting. Build a proper library." "Caleb." She touched the smooth wood, tears pricking her eyes. "This is too much." "Nothing's too much." He pulled her against him, resting his chin on her head. "Want you to have everything you gave up and more." "I gave up nothing that mattered." She turned in his arms, looking up at his beloved face. "And gained everything." He kissed her then, sweet and deep, full of promise. When they pulled apart, he kept her close. "Marry me," he said suddenly. "Today. Now. I know we said we'd wait, but—" "Yes." He blinked. "Yes. Yes." She laughed, joy bubbling up like spring water. "Though perhaps not today. Tomorrow. Give me time to wear something better than my gardening dress. Tomorrow." He lifted her off her feet, spinning her in the small room. "Tomorrow you'll be my wife, and you'll be my husband." She touched his face when he set her down. "My choice, my true choice." They were married 2 days later by the creek where spring runoff sang over stones. Reverend Mills came up from town, along with Sheriff Thompson as witness and, surprisingly, Mr. Peterson from the general store. "Figured someone should stand for the bride," he'd said, awkward but sincere. "Since you've been doing such fine work keeping my books." Eliza wore a simple blue dress, her best, nothing like the silk wedding gown she'd cut to pieces. Caleb wore his Sunday clothes an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. The ceremony was brief, the vows simple but heartfelt. "I, Caleb, take you, Eliza, to be my wife, to honor and cherish, to stand beside in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, so long as we both shall live. I, Eliza, take you, Caleb, to be my husband, to love and respect, to build a life with, to face whatever comes as one, so long as we both shall live." No mention of obedience. They'd discussed that particular tradition and agreed it had no place between them. Reverend Mills pronounced them married as the sun broke through clouds, setting the water to sparkling. Caleb kissed his bride while Sheriff Thompson clapped and Mr. Peterson wiped his eyes, claiming allergies. They served a simple meal afterward. Venison stew, fresh bread, wild berry pie Eliza had managed despite the crude oven. The men left before sunset, pressing congratulations and small gifts. A new axe from Thompson, leather-bound ledgers from Peterson, a Bible from Mills with their names and date inscribed. When they were alone at last, Eliza found herself suddenly shy. They stood on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "No regrets?" Caleb asked softly. "None." She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of her husband against her side. "Though I do have one question." "What's that? Do I still sleep in my bed and you by the fire?" He laughed, low and rich. "I was thinking we might rearrange things, if that's agreeable to you." "Most agreeable." He swept her into his arms, carrying her over the threshold like a proper bride. Inside, the fire cast dancing shadows, and the new wedding ring on her finger, carved from elk antler by Caleb's patient hands, caught the light. That night, they came together as husband and wife with tenderness and passion, years of loneliness falling away like old snow before spring sun. In the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, they whispered promises and plans. Children someday, perhaps. More rooms added to the cabin, a life built season by season, choice by choice. "I love you," Eliza murmured against his chest, listening to his heartbeat strong and steady. "Love you too," he replied, pressing kisses to her hair. "My brave woman, my wife." When morning came, it found them still entwined, reluctant to let go even for the day's necessities. But life on the mountain didn't pause for newlyweds. There was wood to chop, water to haul, animals to tend. They worked side by side as always, but now with the ease of partnership acknowledged and blessed. When Caleb returned from checking traps, Eliza greeted him as a wife greets her husband. When she struggled with the heavy washpot, he was there, not helping because she was weak, but because they were one now, sharing burdens and joys alike. 6 months later, as autumn painted the aspens gold, Eliza stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, hand resting on her still flat belly. Inside, a secret grew, the first of the children they'd dreamed of. She hadn't told Caleb yet, waiting for the right moment. He appeared from the forest, rifle over his shoulder, and her heart swelled as it always did at the sight of him. Her choice, her love, her home. "Good hunting," she called. "Good enough. Got something to show you." She followed him to a clearing she hadn't seen before, gasping at what waited there. He'd built a bench between 2 pines, facing east toward the valley. On the seat was a package wrapped in brown paper. "Sit," he urged. "Open it." Inside was a book, Jane Eyre, leather-bound and new. "How did you—" "Ordered it months ago. Figured you should have at least one book that didn't get left behind." He sat beside her, suddenly uncertain. "Is it right? You mentioned it once." "It's perfect." She clutched the book, remembering that train ride west when this story had been her only companion. How different her own tale had turned out. No mad wife in the attic, no inheritance to equalize them, just choice, pure and simple. "There's more coming," he said. "Placed orders with a seller in Denver, Shakespeare, Dickens, those Bronte sisters you mentioned, building that library I promised. Caleb." She set the book carefully aside, taking his hands. "I have something to tell you." She placed his palm flat against her belly, watched his face transform as understanding dawned. "A baby." His voice was hushed, reverent. "Come spring, if all goes well." He pulled her into his arms, holding her like spun glass. Against her hair, she felt him tremble. "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could feel the answer in every line of his body. "Happy doesn't touch it." He pulled back to frame her face with his hands. "Scared too, but mostly grateful. So damn grateful. For the baby, for you, for this life, for second chances." He kissed her softly. For a woman brave enough to run into a blizzard and crazy enough to stay. They sat together as the sun set, planning additions to the cabin, discussing names, dreaming of a child who would grow up free on this mountain. The old wedding dress was long gone, transformed into useful things. The old promises, made through letters full of lies, were ash on the wind. In their place stood something stronger. Vows made in truth. A ring carved by loving hands. A life chosen step by careful step. And now, new life growing from the ashes of the old. As stars emerged overhead, Eliza thought of that terrified girl on the train, clutching a sketch of a stranger. She'd thought she was traveling toward her fate. She had known she was traveling toward her choice. The best choice she'd ever made. No regrets? Caleb asked again. Their private litany. None, she answered, as she always did. Never, not one. In the morning, they would continue building their home, their family, their future. But tonight, they sat together in the peace of their mountain. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and chosen to hold on. The wedding dress had burned long ago, but from its ashes, love had risen, wild and free and true as the mountains themselves. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West Campfire. Where are you enjoying this story from? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, adventure, and the untamed frontier. Share your thoughts about Eliza and Caleb's journey in the comments. Until next time, partners.